So, I had something completely different planned for this week's episode. Episode 8 was going to be Scottish myths and legends. You know, Kelpies, Selkies, the Loch Ness Monster. The promise that I made in episode 1 about giving Nessie her proper moment. I had it all written. It was going to be fantastic. You would have loved it. But then something happened. Scotland went to the World Cup. And not just that, the Tartan Army went to America. And I watched from here as my country's football supporters invaded Boston. They applied traffic cones to statues across 2 cities. They drained a brewery dry. They received official blessing of a Miami City Commissioner, sent a man in roller skates playing bagpipes down South Beach, made a Major League Baseball pitcher feel it in his chest, and caused the Mayor of Boston to put on a Scotland shirt and stand on the steps of City Hall. The Myths and Legends episode can keep. This can't. Before we even start, I want to be completely upfront about something. I'm not a football fan. Not even a wee bit. I have never been a football fan. I might watch the occasional Scotland match, very occasionally, and purely out of national loyalty rather than any interest in what's happening on the pitch. But football as a sport has never captured me, and I've made peace with that. What I am, unambiguously and without reservation, is a Scotland fan. Those are 2 different things, and the distinction matters. A football fan cares about the game. A Scotland fan cares about Scotland. I care about Scotland. I have been caring for Scotland for this entire podcast, and I'm not about to stop now. So, when Scotland went to the World Cup and the Tartan Army went to America, I wasn't watching the matches, but I was absolutely watching everything else. I have been following the antics of Scotland supporters with the same intensity that actual football fans follow the team, and I have loved every single minute of it. Because what the Tartan Army has been doing in Boston and Miami isn't really about football, it's about Scotland. And that is very much my area. And there's something else I want to share before we get into this properly. When those first photographs came out of Boston, you know, the traffic cones and the statues, the kilts in Fenway Park, the city apparently having been gently annexed by several thousand Scots who had arrived with flags and bagpipes and an apparently inexhaustible capacity for goodwill, I happened to have clients from Boston on tour with me. American clients, Bostonians, people who live there and recognise those statues and know those streets. They showed me the photographs on their phones. The kilts, they understood completely. They'd been in Scotland for several days by this time, and kilts were not a mystery. It was the traffic cones. A traffic cone on the head of Paul Revere. A traffic cone on Samuel Adams. A traffic cone on top of a 7-ton bronze octopus. Their own statues, their own streets, their own city, and someone had gone around in the night with what appeared to be an inexhaustible supply of traffic cones and applied them to anything that stood still long enough. They wanted to know why the cones. Where did the cones come from? Is this a Scottish thing? Is this a football thing? Was it planned? Is there a person in charge of cones? How many cones did they actually bring? So I had to explain the Duke of Wellington statue in Glasgow and the 40-year tradition. The council proposed to raise the plinth and a public outcry ensued. The cone stays. I explained that this is not a football thing specifically, it's a Glasgow thing, and that the Tartan Army had carried this with them as a mark of affection for every city they visit. Because coning a statue is, in Scotland, a gesture of warmth rather than disrespect. You do not cone something you don't love. My clients were kind of quiet for a moment, taking all this in, and then one of them, and this is the bit that I keep coming back to, started laughing. Not just because it was ridiculous, although it is completely ridiculous, but because he had assumed it was some sort of vandalism, some sort of football thuggery, assumed that it was something that you should be annoyed about, when the reality was the complete opposite. It wasn't an act of disrespect, it was a calling card. It was the Tartan Army's way of saying, "We're here, we've come all this way, we love your city, and here is a traffic cone on your most famous statues as proof." "So it's like a greeting," he said. Exactly like a greeting. The most Scottish greeting imaginable. Slightly daft, entirely affectionate, and impossible to ignore. Boston woke up and found traffic cones on its statues and discovered that this is how Scotland says hello. Thousands of people, a long way from home, leaving their mark on a city they had decided to love. The cone isn't a joke. The cone's a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence. By the end of the conversation, they weren't just on our side, they were genuinely annoyed they had missed it. I'm Lesley Kennedy. This is Everything Scotland, and today, the Tartan Army. Scotland's greatest export. And yes, I do include whisky in that. Let me tell you about a group of people who travel thousands of miles to watch their team lose, who have attended major international tournaments without their country even qualifying, who have celebrated draws with the enthusiasm most nations reserve for winning trophies, who have, on multiple documented occasions, been formally thanked by host cities for their behaviour, who have won awards, actual real awards, for being good tourists. These people are the Tartan Army. They are Scotland's travelling football support, and they are, by any reasonable measure, one of the most remarkable and beloved fan cultures in the history of sport. Scotland has not won a major international football tournament, ever. Scotland's international record is, if we're being completely honest, a long and frequently painful lesson in the management of expectations. The World Cup qualification of 2026, Scotland's first in 28 years, felt less like a normal thing and more like a geological event, something that happens on a timescale the human brain is not quite equipped to process. And yet the Tartan Army keeps going. It keeps turning up, keeps singing, keeps dancing, keeps making friends with everyone they encounter, keeps wearing things that no reasonable person would consider appropriate clothing for a football match. I mean, woolen kilts in 30-degree heat, inflatable instruments, full Highland dress in venues that have never previously hosted full Highland dress, and keeps generating the kind of warmth and goodwill that other supporter groups spend decades trying to cultivate and never quite manage. The name, the Tartan Army, was originally used as a mildly pejorative term by the English press, in the way that English newspapers of that era combined the words tartan and army to suggest something slightly menacing. Scottish supporters adopted it immediately, with a particular Scottish instinct for taking a slight and turning it into an identity. The kilt became standard issue. The saltires multiplied, the face paint appeared, and somewhere between the 1978 World Cup in Argentina and the present day, the Tartan Army became not just a nickname, but a brand, one of the most recognisable supporter identities in the world of football. In 1992, FIFA, football's global governing body, awarded the Tartan Army its Fair Play Award for exemplary behaviour as travelling supporters. This was the first time the award has been given to a group of fans rather than a team or an individual. Listen to that again. FIFA gave Scotland's football supporters an award for being nice. There are nations that have won the World Cup without receiving that level of institutional recognition. Scotland, whose participation in tournaments has been characterised largely by its exits at the group stage, have a FIFA Fair Play Award in their collective memory. They're extremely proud of it. More proud, some would argue, than is strictly proportionate. And here's the thing that separates the Tartan Army from most other supporters group in the world of football. Their reputation is not built on what their team has achieved. It is built entirely on how well they have behaved. In host cities across Europe and beyond, the Tartan Army visits follow a recognisable pattern. An advance guard of supporters arrives days before the match and immediately starts making friends with the locals. By the time the main body arrives, they have established relationships with bar owners, hotel staff, taxi drivers that will all be maintained on subsequent visits. During the match itself, regardless of the result, they sing and they generate an atmosphere that opposing supporters and neutral observers consistently describe as one of the most extraordinary in football. After the match, again, regardless of result, they do not riot. They don't fight. They don't do any of the things that have given football supporters of other nations a rather different international reputation. They just go back to the bar. They buy drinks for people they have just met. They are photographed repeatedly and enthusiastically with local children, grandmothers, police officers, and whatever statues are nearby. They make the local news for being nice. They leave and the city misses them. This isn't accidental. There's a genuine conscious culture within the Tartan Army of ambassadorial behaviour, of representing Scotland well, of proving that football supporters can be a force for warmth and connection rather than trouble, and it's taken very seriously. New members of the travelling support are quietly made aware of the standards expected. The reputation has been built over decades and is defended with something approaching pride. As a tour guide who has spent years showing Scotland to the world, I find what the Tartan Army do genuinely thrilling to watch. And it makes me so proud, because what they do out there, going into a city as strangers and leaving as legends, carrying Scotland's warmth and humour and complete inability to walk past a statue without improving it, is essentially what I try to do every day on tour. Just scaled up to several thousand people, in kilts, with considerably more traffic cones than I typically work with. They're doing the same job I do, but they are doing it brilliantly, and they're doing it in cities that I have never been to, in front of people who have never really thought about Scotland before last week, and they're getting the mayor of Boston into a Scotland shirt in the process. I've never managed that on tour, so I'm not going to pretend that I'm not impressed. The Tartan Army has done more for Scotland's international reputation than any marketing campaign, any tourism initiative, any government programme, and they've done it by being themselves, consistently, enthusiastically and unapologetically, with no plan beyond supporting their team and being decent human beings while they do it. Scotland couldn't have asked for better ambassadors. Scotland couldn't have invented better ambassadors, even if it tried. The Tartan Army have also developed a very sophisticated relationship with the result. They would obviously prefer to win. Winning is better, but if winning's not available, and frequently it's not, then a draw is celebrated. Losing narrowly is mourned and then forgiven. Losing heavily is an occasion for dark humour, which Scotland always produces in abundance. The important thing is that everyone is together, and that the singing continues, and that tomorrow there is another bar to find. The Tartan Army's philosophical position on the result is one of the most evolved in the sport, but I suppose it has had considerable time to develop. Now, anyone who's seen them will agree that the photographs of the kilts and the traffic cones are wonderful, but there is another side to the Tartan Army that the headlines don't always manage to capture, because dancing in Trafalgar Square is considerably more photogenic than quietly changing somebody's life. The Tartan Army gives, seriously, consistently, and on a scale that bears absolutely no relationship to the size of the country producing it. In every host country, before tournament matches, collections are organised. There is an organisation called the Tartan Army Sunshine Appeal that has made a donation to a children's charity in every single country where Scotland has played since 1999. Every country, without interruption, regardless of result and regardless of attendance, regardless of whether Scotland qualified for anything or simply turned up for a friendly in a country most people could not immediately locate on a map. Everywhere they go, they give. That's the mission. It's never lapsed. It started in Sarajevo in 1999. Scotland played Bosnia-Herzegovina during a qualifying campaign, and the Foreign Office had advised against travelling to the country, which was still recovering from war. The Tartan Army went anyway, and while they were there, they met a boy called Kemal Karik, who had lost part of his lower leg to a bomb blast. They raised money for his prosthetic limb. That was the first donation. The 112th was made in Boston in 2026. £5,000 to Project Goal at a local children's charity. 112 consecutive donations in 88 countries across 27 years. A children's charity that has never missed a match. In Lithuania in 2003, supporters turned up at a children's hospital with supplies and enough cheerful kilted energy to temporarily convert a hospital ward into the most unusual ceilidh venue in Eastern Europe. The children's faces in those photographs tell you everything you need to know. In 2026, ahead of the World Cup in America, a Paisley waiter called Craig Ferguson walked 3,500 miles from Los Angeles to Boston to raise money for Scottish Action for Mental Health. He raised over £1 million. He arrived in Boston Common to a reception of bagpipes and chanting and the kind of welcome that makes grown adults cry in public without apology. He had walked across an entire continent because Scotland were going to a World Cup, and he wanted to do something worthy of the occasion. He walked across America for charity because Scotland qualified for the World Cup. The Tartan Army isn't just support, it's community. And like the best communities, it looks after people beyond its own boundaries. In countries it's passing through for 4 days. At hospitals and cities it'll probably never visit again. And on streets where nobody knows Scotland's football result, but everybody knows that the people in the kilts arrived and made things better before they left. I think this is the part of the Tartan Army story that I find most genuinely moving. And I say that as someone who, as we've established, doesn't particularly follow football. The sport is the vehicle. What the Tartan Army actually is, what it has always been, underneath the face paint and the noise and the magnificent inappropriateness of traffic cones, is an expression of something real about the Scottish character. The same warmth and generosity and instinct to turn up for people that I see here in Scotland every day, expressed on a global stage by thousands of people who just happen to be wearing kilts. Scotland is a small country. We produce a disproportionate amount of warmth per capita. The Tartan Army is proof of that, demonstrated publicly in cities around the world year after year. And I, for one, am very proud of them. And I find myself saying that and meaning it more than I expected to when I actually sat down to write this episode. Now, America 2026, because that's what brought us here today. Scotland qualified for the FIFA World Cup for the first time in 28 years. The tournament was being held across the United States, Canada and Mexico. The Tartan Army, 28 years of compressed anticipation fizzing inside every one of them, boarded their planes and descended on America. America was not prepared. Scotland's group stage matches were played at the Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts, with Boston as the base. Within approximately 48 hours of the Tartan Army's arrival, the city had been transformed. Kilts were everywhere. Bagpipes in downtown streets at hours of the morning that no bagpipe should reasonably be active. The Sam Adams Boston Tap Room, home of one of America's most iconic beers, ran out of its signature Boston lager after Scottish fans drank 4 times the amount the bar typically serves during a 4-day major holiday. Nearly 90 kegs. Gone. Emergency deliveries had to be scheduled. "We've never seen anything like it," said the taproom manager. No, they had not. Nobody had. This is not the kind of thing that has a precedent. When I was explaining all of this to my Boston clients on our tour, when they were showing me the photographs and I was watching their faces go from baffled to delighted to slightly overwhelmed, one of them said to me, "Well, why are they so happy if they're expecting to lose?" And I thought about it for a moment and I said, "Because they're Scottish people at a World Cup for the first time in 28 years in one of the best cities in the world with each other. There is no situation in which the Tartan Army is not happy. This is simply what they're like, all the time, everywhere they go." My clients nodded, looked at the photographs again, and one of them said, "I wish I was Scottish." Which is, I think, the highest compliment the Tartan Army can receive, and the one they'll probably receive most often. After Scotland's opening win over Haiti, which it has to be said was their first World Cup victory since 1990, ending a 36-year wait, the Boston Red Sox hosted Scotland Day at Fenway Park. The fans marched from Evans Way Park to the ballpark, fronted by pipe bands. At least 5,000 supporters are thought to have took part, though the scenes inside Fenway suggest the number was considerably higher. Fenway Park, one of the most storied sporting venues in America, was briefly and magnificently the most Scottish place outside of Scotland. And then there were the traffic cones. I need to explain something for the listeners who may not know this, because it's important context. In Glasgow, the Duke of Wellington statue at the Gallery of Modern Art has been regularly crowned with a traffic cone since the 1980s. It began as an act of late-night mischief by unknown persons, probably under the influence of alcohol, and evolved over decades into an unofficial symbol of the city. Glasgow's cheerful, irreverent disrespect for pomposity and grandeur. When Glasgow City Council proposed raising the pedestal in 2013 to make the statue harder to reach, there was genuine public outcry. The cone stays. This is non-negotiable. The Tartan Army brought this tradition to Boston. Bill Russell, outside Boston City Hall. They make way for the Ducklings Ducks in the public garden. George Washington, Paul Revere, Mayor Kevin White, Samuel Adams himself, which has a certain poetic justice to it, given what we're doing to his brewery. A 7-ton bronze octopus sculpture. NBC Boston published a dedicated article listing 17 statues that had received the treatment. 17 statues. A dedicated news article at a World Cup. Bostonians were not merely tolerant of this, they were delighted. The Mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu, wearing a Scotland shirt on the steps of City Hall, told reporters, "The Scotland fans are the absolute best. They have been incredibly warm, they've been supporting our businesses, they've been getting to know our community and treating Boston as if it were another home away from home for them. I hope that the Tartan Army will keep coming back to Boston." The Mayor of Boston said this in a Scotland shirt. We're not making this up. It actually happened. Then the Tartan Army moved to Miami. In Little Havana, an enthusiastic supporter attempted to place a traffic cone on the statue of Juan Ponce de Leon, the Spanish explorer, and was scolded by local law enforcement. The fans' response was immediate and completely magnificent. They're obviously not Boston. What happened next is, I would argue, one of the finest diplomatic incidents in the history of football tourism. Ronaldo Escalona, the commissioner for Miami's District 3, came to Little Havana personally and placed a cone on a statue himself. He apologised for the previous day's police intervention. He said, and I'm quoting directly, "All bets are off. Go cone crazy." A Miami City Commissioner attended a gathering of Scottish football supporters, placed a traffic cone on a statue and apologised to Scotland on behalf of Miami and gave official civic permission to cone anything within reach. This is real. This happened in June 2026. Little Havana issued a statement saying they are proud to welcome the Tartan Army. The Commissioner added, "To all the Scottish fans, enjoy your stay. Enjoy Little Havana and keep bringing the same spirit and camaraderie that has made the Tartan Army famous around the world." Meanwhile, one committed supporter took to South Beach on roller skates, playing bagpipes, serenading bemused sunbathers at close range, in 30-degree Miami heat, for no other reason than it seemed like a good idea and Scotland were in America, and life is short. Scotland supporters also marched a mile from a Miami bar to a baseball game, singing the entire way, and generated an atmosphere that left the starting pitcher Tyler Phillips visibly moved. "That was unbelievable," he said after the game. "From the second I walked out, I felt it in my chest. It felt great." A Major League Baseball pitcher felt a Scottish football crowd in his chest at a baseball game in Florida, while Scotland were playing in a World Cup match somewhere else entirely. The football, for the record, went as Scotland tournaments tend to go. A win over Haiti, their first World Cup victory since 1990, a defeat to Morocco, and a 3-0 loss to Brazil in the final group game that ended their World Cup participation. The Tartan Army went home. They went home having made America feel better about America, having caused a city commissioner to personally apologise to Scotland and place a traffic cone on a statue, having trained almost 90 kegs of Boston Lager, and having been described by the Mayor of Boston as the absolute best. That, by any measure, is a successful World Cup. Wherever the Tartan Army goes, Scotland goes with them. Not just the flags and the face paint, those are the surface. Underneath is something richer. The pipes go everywhere. This is non-negotiable. There's a piper at every gathering, in every hotel lobby that hasn't implemented a firm no pipes policy, and, as Miami discovered, occasionally on roller skates. The sound of Scottish pipes in a city that has never heard them before produces an effect that is difficult to describe. People stop. People film, people follow the sound and stand there, slightly overwhelmed, trying to work out what's happening to them. What is happening to them is Scotland. Singing is a separate and glorious phenomenon. The Tartan Army sings constantly, comprehensively, and with the commitment of people who genuinely mean it. Flower of Scotland, written by Roy Williamson of the Corries in 1967, the unofficial national anthem, is performed before every match with a fervour that makes the hairs in the back of your neck stand up, regardless of how many times you've heard it. It's about a battle fought in 1314, and it still sounds like it was written this morning. As I said, Flower of Scotland was written by Roy Williamson of the Corries in 1967, and the Corries remain to be one of the great Scottish acts, something we'll come back to properly in another episode. But I want to mention it here because Flower of Scotland is one of those songs that does something to me every time I hear it, regardless of context. Hearing it sung by thousands of people in a stadium in America, or echoing through the streets of Boston at midnight, or rising from a bar in Little Havana, it's not just a football song. This is a country that has been carrying its identity across oceans for centuries, finding its voice again in a place it never expected to be. The Tartan Army carries Scotland everywhere it goes, and Scotland, in those moments, sounds like itself. This is how culture travels, not through formal exchange programmes or diplomatic initiatives, through tens of thousands of people in kilts turning up in your city, buying your beer, coning your statues, singing your locals to sleep, raising money for your charities, and leaving you when they finally go home, with a warmth towards Scotland that no marketing campaign could have manufactured. The Tartan Army's football team has never won a major international trophy. But in the only competition that ultimately matters, the one for the hearts of the people who encounter them, they are the champions of the world. They have been for a very long time. Come on, Scotland! So instead of the usual listener stories this week, I want to tell you about some of my guests on tour. Because while the World Cup has been happening, I have been on tour, and the World Cup has followed me into each and every one. Every group has had something to say about Scotland and the Tartan Army, and the reactions have been, without exception, wonderful. I had a group of Americans last week. They already knew about the cone incident. It had been all over their news. And one of them, before we even left the car park, turned to me and said, "Is the traffic cone thing a Scotland thing or a football thing?" And I thought, this is going to be a good tour. We talked about the Duke of Wellington statue for a good 20 minutes before we get anywhere near a castle. Then I had a Canadian couple who had been following the Tartan Army on social media specifically, tracking the cones, collecting the photographs. They had a running tally. They weren't Scottish. They had absolutely no connection to Scotland. They were simply deeply invested in what a group of Scottish football supporters were doing to statues in Boston and Miami, and they wanted to discuss it all in detail. I, of course, obliged. The castle we were supposed to be visiting waited just a little while longer. And then I had another group. They were American but of Mexican descent, and one of the women, who had been fairly quiet for most of the morning, suddenly said, "I think the traffic cone people might be my favourite people in the world. I hope they make it to Mexico. We would love them there." Just like that, completely unprompted, a statement of fact. The rest of the group nodded and agreed. Nobody was going to disagree. This is what the Tartan Army does. It creates fans in people who have no reason to be fans, in countries they're not even visiting, from photographs of traffic cones on statues they've never seen. If you can make a quiet woman on a Scottish tour declare you her favourite people in the world based on your conduct in Miami, you're doing something right. Something very, very right. I want to hear your Tartan Army stories. If you were in Boston or Miami this summer, if you encountered the Tartan Army anywhere in the world, if you have been following the antics from your sofa and have thoughts, or if maybe you're in the Tartan Army, send them in. Details will be in the show notes. This is a conversation I really want to continue. And that brings us on to your Scots word of the week. This week, gallus. 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 It means bold, daring, cheeky, stylishly confident, a swagger without arrogance. That particular quality of someone who does something audacious and pulls it off and knows it. He's pure gallus. He's magnificently and cheerfully bold. A man in roller skates playing bagpipes on South Beach in 30-degree heat is gallus. An entire fan base that cones the statues of a city and gets the commissioner's blessing is gallus. The Tartan Army is, collectively and individually, one of the most gallus things Scotland has ever produced. Use it. It will serve you well. Next week on Everything Scotland, I'm keeping the promise I made in episode 1, and then postponed due to current events. We're going into the myths, legends and folklore of Scotland. The Kelpies, the fairies, the Scottish kind, not the wings and flower petals kind, the brownie, which will do your housework for free on one specific condition, and Nessie. I promised you Nessie, and Nessie is coming. The jury remains out. If you're enjoying Everything Scotland, please subscribe, leave a review and share the podcast with others you think will like it too. You can also find us on social media as @EverythingScotlandOfficial. And if you have a Tartan Army story from Boston, Miami or anywhere in the world, I want it. Send it in. The listener mail this week is going to be something special. I just know it. I'm Lesley Kennedy. This is Everything Scotland. Slán Java.